It is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, our keynote speaker on the future of family enterprise, John Davis, who is a global authority on family enterprise, family wealth, and the family office. Since the 1970s, and there's a little story there I will tell you afterwards about the 70s. He has been a researcher, author, advisor, and speaker on multi-generational business strategy, creating some of the field's most widely used frameworks. At the MIT Sloan School of Management, he teaches an MBA, and he teaches MBA and executive courses on family enterprise and family social impact, and directs MIT's family enterprise programs. He previously taught at Harvard Business School for 21 years, where he founded the family business studies area. Davis also serves as chairman of the Cambridge Family Enterprise Group, which he founded in 1989. He has advised families in more than 70 countries, including many of the world's largest enterprises. So it's a great pleasure, John, to have you here. And the reference to the 70s that I want to make is, John and I were classmates in the doctoral program. We actually started out together. So we know things about each other that we are not going to discuss today. So with that, John, welcome to Northeastern for the second time, and thank you so much for doing this.
Great pleasure. Hi, everyone. It's just a great pleasure, Ravi, to be back with you. Ravi was the smartest guy in our class. I kind of held up the end of our class, but found some useful things to do over the last almost 50 years. And I'll tell you what I've been up to and thinking about in this kind of the second half of my career so far. And let me also call out Kim Edelston, whose talk I really enjoyed. And Kim, you will hear some echoes of what you were talking about and recommending in some of my comments. And then Farhad Forbes, my goodness, it's so nice to see you again and to really a leader in the family enterprise field, and also one of the great organizers of wonderful conferences and knows a lot that we academics try to learn in our career. Okay. The future of family enterprise. Wow, that's a big one. Let me start here. There we are. I like this picture. And I like it because it captures a lot about the environment of a family enterprise, in the sense that you could be sailing your boat, your family enterprise, here in quiet waters. You know, the water's running, it's pretty steady, not very challenging to navigate. Or you could be in your boat in more turbulent waters. And if you're not careful, especially today, you could be here. And you don't want to be there, because the next step is to be there. And now the metaphor is a bit flawed, because it implies that you're inevitably going to hit the waterfall. And that's not true. In real life, in real business life, there are other tributaries, there are other ways to turn off into other streams and to stay around. But most businesses eventually meet their demise in some way, but it doesn't have to be a crisis, it doesn't have to be a waterfall. But I ask my executive students and others, where do they think they are in their family enterprise boat on this river? What do you think? What do you think? What do most of them say? Are they close to a crisis, or in a crisis? Come on. Are they in turbulent waters? The water is running pretty fast. There are rocks in those waters. You have to be careful about how you navigate. Plenty of risks. Or are they in pretty calm, steadily flowing, but pretty calm waters? What do you think? Take 100, I've asked this question to maybe a few hundred now, a few hundred executives. Where do people feel they are in their boat today? Steady waters, turbulent waters, or crisis time? How many of you would say crisis? How many would say steady? A few, yeah. And how many would say turbulent? Yeah. Now, the fact that this talk is about turbulence could have given that away, okay? But that's right. I get in a room of 40, 50 family business executives, maybe a couple, 2 or maybe 3, will say that their business is in dangerous times right now, facing real threats. Several, maybe up to 20, 30%, will say that their business is in pretty steady water. I don't believe them. And the rest will say we're in turbulent waters. And this has led me to one of the following easy conclusions. Let me just advance this. That in the course of a generation or two, you might spend some of that time in steady waters. In 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and I can go back to about 50, in my personal experience, there were other turbulent times. There were other times that were rocky, unpredictable, where you had to really pay attention. And then it's not that unusual over generations for a family or a business to go through a period or two of crisis. And crisis can come from outside, or crisis can come from inside. From outside, you can go through catastrophes, tragedies in the family, or tragedies for your business. That happens, can happen. But you can also experience economic depressions. You can also think of all the poor family companies in Ukraine along the border with Russia that were erased when Russia invaded. Things like that happen. So, point number one, there are at least these 3, and you could imagine maybe some hybrid situations, but these are a good starting point. And they each have some characteristics that you can identify, and they each say to us that suggest to us that there are particular ways that you need to manage and own things if you're going to survive and prosper, hopefully, through any of these circumstances. So, in relatively steady times, I don't think I could use the word steady because I don't even know if that exists anymore. But in relatively steady times, there are still changes. There are still cycles industries mature and you go through a period eventually of decline. So, there are changes and there's some volatility. It's just that it's more predictable and manageable. In turbulent times, on the other hand, things are happening very quickly. Change is not only almost constant, but can be, and I think we've all experienced this in the last 10 years, pretty sudden. So it's almost seismic. You're standing on the ground and the ground moves, and you have to find a new way to balance yourself. There can be sudden, unsettling, what I call dislocations, to differentiate it from the word disruption, which when you go through a disruption, we overuse the term disruption. When you go through a disruption, it really means, think of COVID, or for some of us who can remember, think of the 2008 financial crisis. When you go through a disruption, you really have to change for a period of time the way you do things. The old ways of doing things, for example, in COVID with your workplace, aren't applicable. The game has changed significantly. And these periods are much less predictable because of the constant change, the sudden change, and the volatility that we're going through. I'll come back to that. And then crises, just get ready for it, because I think that this is possible, and we actually know a lot about crisis management. That's one thing that the world has been through enough of it, that there's actually a specialty in crisis management that I've read a lot of, and I think we know a lot of what to get ready for and how to manage through it. This is the period that I think we need to, come on, it's a little slow, get ready for. And what I've been spending my time, some of my time, doing is understanding in each of these three ways how you move through these times successfully, what you do. And what you do in turbulent times, you hopefully have had this experience, scaling, innovation. We heard a lot about innovation so far today. You've built financial stability. You've learned to plan ahead. Even if things are relatively predictable, in steady times, you still need planning. And you still need to build family unity, family discipline. These things typically apply. But then in turbulent times, you need to do some additional things, and some of these things even better. In turbulent times, we need to anticipate better. Things are changing quickly. Things can change in a sudden and disruptive way for us. And we need to be better at anticipating in a world that is less predictable. It's an interesting challenge. One of the ways in which, and I'll come back to all of these downstream here, if you get the metaphor, scenario planning and experimentation seem to be the new buzzwords and good management advice to help you stay agile. And you're building agility not only in your organization. You can't pick up a management article today and not read about agility. I challenge you. Go to HBR, go to any other good management journal, and people are talking about it for obvious good reasons. But in a family enterprise, we need to be not only agile in our organization. What does that even mean? Well, you learn, we have a system of management. To be agile within our organization, we can now reshuffle who does what, who reports to what, how we stay organized, and do it in a different way. And do it pretty flexibly. And do it again and again. That's agility. But in our world, you also need to stay agile in your portfolio of assets, businesses that you own, and activities that you do. Those things are going to come and go faster than they ever have. And if you hang on too tight to not only how we do things, but what we own and our practices, you'll be left behind. Now, some things have a longer life, and you have to innovate and scale, innovate. That is always the case. But other things, they have a shorter life, and we need to know when to do this and move beyond it into other activities. We need to build greater resilience of different kinds. The importance of trusted leadership and governance goes way up, in my view. And we have to have much more engagement by owners and our board. All of this is coming up, so I'll move here. Okay. So I believe that there are these three types of environments. We need to be good at each of them. The steady environment, family companies are pretty built for. The crisis environment, not too many organizations are good at that, but you can become good enough to get through it. But you need to read about it, understand it, practice. It'll happen at some point, and those skills, your investment in learning how to do it or thinking about how to do it will pay off for you. But turbulence, that's where we are today. And our world today looks like this. You could add to this list, but I think this list is pretty self-evident. First of all, the world is pretty interconnected today. Not only digitally, but through trade and travel, and it's also produced because of the flows of people, goods, services, ideas, etc., and the movement especially of people around the world. Our societies, our organizations, even our families are much more diverse now and complex than they've ever been. We have faster and more volatile change, some seismic changes, as I've said. People have more choices. Your customers have more choices. Your employees have more choices. And your kids have more choices. They don't need to work for, devote their careers to the family company. They may choose to, but it used to be, I know I sound like an old guy now. I am. But it used to be that the family business was the best career choice you could make for a lot of people. If you were good, you could get to the top. You could be paid more. You could have a more interesting career working with your family than if you chose to spend your career out there somewhere. And families, took advantage of that. Talent within the family was easier to get. Not so true today, of course. In this world, expanding opportunities. we tend to see the negatives, the problems, the challenges, even the existential threats that we face today, but this is a world of expanding opportunities. If you have the talent and the insight and the capital to go after some of these things, or the alliances, the relationships, et cetera, which are more important today than ever, you can do a lot in today's world. But we're in a world where there are lots of threats, lots of risks, and the world socially, politically, and economically is terribly unequal and unfair to a lot of people. And we're suffering from that today because our societies increasingly tense, increasingly fragmented. Let me think. I've been, in the last year, I'm sure I've been in a dozen different countries, working with families, spending some time, giving talks, et cetera. I've traveled a lot in my life. You should see my airline miles. They're impressive, right? More impressive than my bio, Ravi, I've got to say. But in these worlds, I have, in every single one of these countries, friends, clients would describe their countries pretty much like this. It's pretty tense now. The inequality is building. The sense of alienation has gone up. We tend to be politically stuck. The refrain, this is not just the US. This is a lot of places today. And here's one thing that easy to identify. It used to be 10 years, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, that you had more time to make key decisions. I think this is really powerful. That if you wanted to make a key hire, someone came on the labor market, you could spend a little time interviewing, searching, talking to people before you decided. Today, not so much. You better move pretty fast if you want to get somebody who's a really good talent. If you want to make an investment today, you have to move faster than ever before. The investment opportunity typically goes away. If you want to solve a problem today, and there are lots of them, you better act more quickly or the problem will grow. So the windows of opportunity, both on the problem and opportunity side to deal with things, has been getting smaller and smaller and smaller while the world is less predictable. Think about that. You have to make more key decisions. There are more risks, things to watch out for. Are there more opportunities? Yes, arguably, yes. But the world looks like this. We know the road is going to bend, but does it bend back? And you only can see out so far. I remember, here's another old person saying, I remember when businesses made 10-year plans, not visions, plans. Do you remember that? Yeah. What is long-term plan? Now, the plans, how far out do we plan today in business? What do you think? A few years, yeah. And 3 is really considered pretty long-term now, right? You're taking a kind of a risky bet if you go out 3 years. We have to go out 3 years or more. When you're making a capital bet, that's for 10 years. It could be for 20 years. And you have to place your bets now in a world where you can't see very far out and see what's coming at you. And there is a lot that's coming at you. Not too long ago, this is what we focused on. Today, it looks more like that. There are lots of things that could change, probably will change, are notable and potential opportunities, but also potential threats. And you're doing this, you're paying attention to this in an unpredictable, foggy world. You can't see a lot of these coming at you. We need to understand the trends that are moving in order to really understand how many of these are going to affect us. So, what's driving all of this? Well, in part, it's production technology. What has excited and driven every industrial revolution that we've experienced, from the first one that involved steam power into electricity and to automated production and computers, and then finally in 2017. 2017, I was on my way between Harvard Business School and MIT, and I didn't see this AI change. Colleagues at MIT that I met did, and they acquainted me with it. At MIT, they were not just aware of this, they were probably responsible for most of it, right? And so every time we have gone through a change in production technology, these are big, big, big changes. Eventually, they work their way through society. But in every one of these, as we've moved from one period to the next, some companies have been fortunate to move quickly and take advantage of this new technology. A lot of companies go under. A lot of people lose their jobs. A lot of societies going through these changes experience extraordinary tensions. Sometimes, often in the first two, it produced revolutions and wars and depressions. So the movement in production technology has always been something that we pay attention to it. Now, as we move into the AI age, are we experiencing worries about who's going to lose their jobs? Yeah, you read about this every day, and we should be worried about that. Are we worried about how it's going to impact our competitiveness and our ability to have any leverage in the markets in which we operate? Yeah, we are, and we should be. So this is causing a lot of anxiety at this point. Some of the benefits and who will benefit will become clearer in the next 2 years, but that was a big change. Now, production technology has always been, as I said, a big mover in its impact, good and bad, on companies of all kinds, including family companies. But there's other stuff too. Production technology would be part of one of the technological advances that we've made, but we've made hundreds of technological advances. Geopolitics and its impact on trade, another big impact. We felt some of that recently, haven't we? And societies and our political and economic systems are always changing to some extent, but the change we've seen in the last 20 years has been profound. And then the big, big disruptor is at the top. The environmental changes we're going through and the degradation of the environment and our ecology is causing and will cause more huge issues for us to adjust to. But these are the big categories. These are things on the outside. that could impact us. There are lots of particulars here. And one of the things we could do, and I would recommend this, if you're connected to, in a family with a family company, is you'll get these slides, print out this page, and then just spend some time in your family circling the factors up here that are or could impact your business, your family, your society. Okay? And there are a lot of these. And, but they're also, and these do that, we know that. But there are also things that happen not out there, but inside, in our family, in our company, that are also changing. And those internal changes could be impacted or encouraged by things happening in society or technology, et cetera. It's a system and these things work with one another, but you need to pay attention to these kinds of factors too. So a lot is going on. And you're in this world that is turbulent, but you have a particular context. Today we're looking at India. So you would ask, if you're in an Indian family or family business, you would ask, well, this new turbulent world, how is it impacting India? How is it impacting Southeast Asia? How is it impacting our industry, our network, our society, our social class, et cetera? The impact of the world is felt differently. It goes through a filter of your context to impact your company and also your family. And what's happening in your family and family enterprise are also causing some of the change, slow and fast and sharp change that you're experiencing. Okay, that's the way to think about it, I think. Now, how is it working out so far? And by the way, because I'm on the road a lot, and because I'm in so many different places, I just spent, 8 or 9 hours, that was it, in Taipei, talking to families. I did that for my school, the Sloan School, just a week ago. Over to Taipei, 9 hours in Taipei, lots of talks, get back on the plane, come back so I could teach. So I'm moving around a lot, but I'm picking up intelligence everywhere. I don't think that the different countries are I don't think the countries are very different anymore in terms of what they're experiencing. Now, obviously, if you're in Taiwan, you worry about being invaded by your neighbor, China, and if you're in Poland, you worry about being bombed by Russia. There are some country differences. But for the most part, I think people would say these things are true in my country too. And the big idea here is that what's happening here is creating more big movements and sudden movements than we have probably seen, at least in this country, for a long, long time, maybe a century. Early 1900s, when you read the history, sounds remarkably similar to the period we're in right now. But including a pandemic, including a war, including, a president that most people thought was, a little strange. It was a very difficult period in this country. And families are going through lots of interesting changes and look different today than they looked a while back. So, and the big one here is not only their families tending to be more diverse and more complex, but they're getting more geographically dispersed. It's harder and harder to keep them united and even close. There's a lot more individualism in families today than ever before. This is also true in society. I think the focus on the individual and the individual believing that it's about me is a cancer that is hurting our society. Most societies, most families today are weaker because of all of the focus on me, me, me. And social media reinforces that, makes it, just puts it on steroids. And so the commitment by next generation members, I see this in the class that I teach at Sloan, MBA class, 60 students. And I would say fewer than a quarter of them are really committed to going back to their family companies. 20 years ago, it was 60, 70%. Now it's far less. No judgment here, and maybe they'll wind their way back to their families and family companies, but much less commitment and more divergence between the generations on some key issues. Social impact is one of them, but it's not the only one. So this is the world. And a couple of years ago, three plus, I asked the question, do families in business see what I'm seeing? And if they do, are they ready for it? And so I did some research. And I was thinking at that time, you know, I think that there are some advantages to being an enterprising family or having a family enterprise that include being long-term. We heard that in Mr. Godrej's comments today. Having more financial stability. Family companies are known for carrying less debt, being less leveraged, and more able to withstand volatility. Innovation, Kim spoke about that. It turns out the research on product and process innovation shows that family companies are significantly more innovative in these ways. That's interesting. But also their stakeholder and community orientation. Workplace, employees, customers, suppliers, et cetera, trying to build a loyal network, and we heard this from that wonderful Next Generation panel that I thought was terrific. So these are useful in this world. Now you have to work harder to maintain it, but they're useful. But there are also some characteristics, typical characteristics of family companies that worry me and probably should worry you. One is they tend to be slower making big changes. And I used to say, yeah, they're slower, but they're better. Because we also know that family companies significantly outperform non-family companies. And so they're better, but they're slower. I no longer am comfortable saying that you can be better if you're slower. Because the world is moving so fast now, we better get quicker at making important decisions. And that implies a lot about not only leadership, but also governance and the role of owners, and I'll come to that. Families overemphasize control of operations, but also ownership. I like to say to my students and clients, you're not interested in control, you're obsessed with control, you know? And you've got to lighten up a little bit about it because you can share ownership of some things. You can partner with others, it's okay. And because they may have more knowledge or more capital or more experience than you do. And collaboration, partnering needs to be, control needs to be balanced with these other interests. They also have what I call an operator mindset. I'll come to that. Being really focused on the operations and operational excellence. These things, although they have been advantages in the family business world, now concern me. We'll come back to it. So I did some research. And the research was funded by Citi Private Bank that really wanted a white paper to talk with their clients about, but they were also very helpful in connecting me with a bunch of family companies globally. This was a global study, about 20 in-depth interviews and about 400 responses to not a long survey, but it took a good 30 minutes to complete this survey, and we collected lots of good data. Both generations were represented. 5 regions of the world were represented. And what was interesting is that the senior and junior generations saw things very much the same way. I wasn't expecting that, but they did. And this is what they said, that in terms of external, remember they're also internal, change drivers, these were the big ones that were on their minds. Volatile economies, digital advances, industry changes. We were just leaving COVID. So pandemics, viruses, diseases were very much on their mind, but it's good to hang on to that one. That could come back. Political, government problems, and then climate change was way down on the list. It usually is. It shouldn't be, but it is. But these were the big ones. And you might think about, in your own case, what you would describe as big external issues or change drivers. Internally, almost all of these really relate to the next generation. How are we going to transfer leadership and ownership and wealth into the next generation? Our companies are changing. What should the family really be doing in our company? Should we be operators still? Should we be here at the board level? Do we want to stay just as owners? What's the role and the right role of owners? Mr. Godrej was talking about that eloquently in his remarks. The only thing I would change, Kim and I talked about this, is that I think family members are also professional managers. And we often have this problem of saying they're family managers and professional managers, implying that if you're family, you're not professional. And I think it's a slip of the tongue that we have to get more careful about our language. But anyhow, what should the family be doing? Family role evolution and family member opportunities, the next generation, and how things are changing in business were really on their minds. Okay, so that's what they pointed out. And then I asked them this, okay, do you think this is going to continue? This turbulence, this change, this pressure that we're feeling? And most of them, 2/3, said, yeah, we think we can expect this to go through the decade. More importantly, 84%, this is like almost everybody, said, and in fact, to adjust, we're going to have to go through moderate to radical change. Okay, and I'm thinking, okay, you're getting it. That's great. This is really, you're on it. But then I said, asked, how ready are you? And this is what they said. Less than 30 said that their companies, their enterprises were ready. Less than a quarter thought that their family is ready. Now, this shows up a lot. When you ask about business readiness and family readiness, which I do periodically to people, families are typically less ready than the business is on certain topics. And I guess that makes sense, right? Because you can tell your employees what to do. You can't tell your family really what to do. And that families usually take longer to get comfortable with things. So, here we are. We're at this interesting point, and I think most of the families that said that they weren't ready, I would put them there, because things are moving so fast that that's a dangerous place to be. Now, if we revisit, come on. I think that's the right way to point it. Okay. So here we are looking at turbulence management, and this is how I would recommend families in business and family companies what they need to do. And I'm going to start with trusted leadership. These are the big five that I'm recommending, and in half of my career, half of my professional life is devoted to advising families, as Ravi kindly pointed out. I've been an academic. I love my academic work. It gives me an opportunity to kind of summarize what I'm learning and try to make sense of it and teach it. But a lot of it, most of what I've learned by working with families and understanding the challenges, the strengths of their system, and helping them to solve some problems, but also take advantage of some opportunities that they have. And this really is being, this advice is being really put to use in our clients today, and we're getting really good results from it. So that's what makes me feel comfortable advocating this. But let me go to leadership. Leaders today need to do more. It's a more active job today than it ever has been, I think. Because things are moving so fast, because there are so many risks that need to be understood and prepared for and sometimes addressed. And the world is less predictable. So you got to look at it more carefully and really analyze what could happen as a result of the various forces that I showed you. So anticipating now is more challenging, but absolutely more important. And despite the fog, just because it's foggy out there, just because you can't see, doesn't absolve leaders from setting a direction. You get that, right? I mean, it's your job. If you're a leader, you got to set direction. Now, you hope to get good advice. You can have other people helping you analyze and but it comes down to you and your board, and ultimately to the owners to say, this is where we're going. This is where we think our best choices are. But you also need to emphasize who you are, why you and what you want and what you're trying to achieve, you've got to make certain tough choices, even though they're harder to make today. Build a learning culture, build agility, as I talked about, and then build resilience. Resilience. This is important to understand. In steady times, you're still going to get volatility like that in your industry, for example. And there's still business cycles, right? There are periods of growth, there are periods of recession, et cetera. Family companies actually do better in downturns than they do in high growth periods. High growth periods, family companies typically look kind of okay. But in risky periods and in downturns, family companies shine. Why? Well, because they carry less debt, because they're long-term thinkers, because they're committed to getting there, because they're loyal to the people who work for them and supply them and their communities. Loyalty matters in these kinds of organizations, and so they tend to stick it out and do better. So, but you need resilience. You need financial resilience. You need a strong balance sheet. I love strong balance sheets. You also need lots of talent resilience. Family companies tend to be a little bit shaky on talent resilience. They tend to stay too long, too loyal, too long to certain people who have been loyal to them, I get it, but can no longer adapt to what we need to do today. That's a vulnerability. And family companies need to hire more aggressively, retain better talent, and know how to move the less productive talent to jobs and activities without disrupting the new things that they're doing. That's the key, I think. And unity, being able to stay together, marching together in times of uncertainty. But we have a tendency, I call it the theory of one, a tendency to think of leadership in our systems coming from one person. And that is just an error to think of leadership that way. You need strong business leadership, but leadership in business today is much more collaborative, or needs to be, team-oriented than just one person autocratically setting direction. And I think Mr. Gottridge would back me up on that. But leaders also include your board and the owners, and we tend not to think of those two groups as leadership groups, but they are. And think about the owners. More and more decisions are floating up to the owners today. Your industry is consolidating. As owners, should you be aware of that, on top of that, concerned about it, thinking about what we're going to do? Yes, you should. There are new competitors. Technology is changing. Customer needs and customer power is changing in our business. Should that concern us? Yeah, it should. Why? Country risks. The next generation isn't showing any interest. As owners of the enterprise, should that concern us? Should that rise to our attention? Yeah. Why? Why do you think? I think, obviously, but what do you think? What do you think of this question? What should owners be paying attention to these kinds of issues? What do you think? How many of you are owners of your family business? Raise your hand if you are. Okay, so a small number. How many of you are or plan to be owners of your family business? Raise your hand. More hands are going up. I'm getting a couple of MIT hands here. Do you know what that is? I tell my students about this all the time. This is an MIT hand. You know, you ask a question, and how many are, and then people go like this. You think, what the heck? I can't see that hand. Okay, let me do it again. This is a real hand. Okay. How many are or will be owners of their family companies? Okay, maybe a third or so. Okay, owners. You need to be looking at this, thinking about issues like this, planning to do something. Why? Because any one of these items, could result in an important issue that's going to come to you eventually. It's going to involve a big bet. If you change technology in your company, is that expensive? Yeah. Could it disrupt your culture that you're so concerned about? You bet. Could it result in a change in the leadership hierarchy? Yes, and that concerns you. So if you're an owner and technology is increasing, or even if your country is so risky now that you need to think about moving part of your operations or part of your capital to another place, does that concern you? You bet it does. So does the next generation not showing up? Guthridge was in this exact predicament, right? Should that concern you as an owner? Yes, because we may have a good business in the future, but it may not be a family business. So, these things should get the owner's attention. But who among the owners? Because I like to say that owners come in 5 different flavors. And you might have obstructive owners, I hope not, on the left, typically some passive owners, and then it gets helpful. Supportive owners that aren't active making key decisions for the ownership group, but they will support these decisions if they think they're good ones. And they support the standards, they support the governance system, but who you really need to develop here are you hope to get a wealth creator or two. These are people that really know how to make money. But they are a particular type of active owner. The active owners are the ones that either work in the business, sit on the board, or have other professional experience and training so that when you need to make a good, important, big decision, they can help, okay? And these active owners need to be pretty aligned to work together well as a team so that they can stick together and make the key decisions that you need. And the key decisions look like this. These are the big ones. Strategic vision, making the capital bets, people bets, culture bets, governance system, and who but the owners are really responsible for getting the next generation installed. So owners are accountable for all of these things. Here's the interesting data point and conclusion. That if you look back, as I have, on the history of large number of family companies that have made it 3 or more generations, were they good at operations? Yes, typically they were. Not in all cases, but generally families that stay successful, that beat the three generation rule, are good operators. But that doesn't really tell you enough. But because only the families that made good owner level decisions stayed around. Should we diversify into this? Do we adopt the new technology? Who should lead the company? Who should be on our board or advising us? How do we get the next generation ready? The owners that made those big owner-level decisions, well, they stayed around. And they were typically also good operators. They took a lot of pride in operations. They stressed quality. They served their customers well. They loved that, but they were good owners. That's the key. What we tend to give too much credit to great operations, because it's exciting and it's wonderful and it's how we're known, and too little credit to good ownership. In part because the people that are making the owner-level decisions are typically the active owners and in charge of the business. So we think it's good business leadership. That's where the credit goes. But in fact, it's business leaders and active owners thinking like owners. So here's the point. Owners need to think more like owners, but most of them think like operators. And if you want to know why only a fraction of the families, as Kim pointed out earlier, survive very long, it's because only those people are typically thinking like owners. That's the point. And so the development of good owners and good board members. Gottridge also said, wow, this is an important one. How do you get the owners to develop into good board members? It's a great question. We're working on that question now. We've got about a dozen client projects where that's what we're doing right now. Developing programs, developing experiences, developing dialogue to build somebody into a good board member who, by definition, would be a good active owner, right? So, are operations important? Yeah. But this is what we tend to love. Is thinking like an owner important? Yes. But this is what we tend not to do. How many of our business schools train us beyond management or leadership? Also important. We're not even training on governance in our business schools. A little bit here and there, not much. But is anybody training on ownership? No. No, it does not. That concept of needing to be a good owner has, for the most part, for the last 90 years in management education, been totally ignored. Well, if you're out working with families and you're working with them on these issues, eventually you discover, it took me over 30 years to get this, but I finally got it, that we need people also. Yeah, I want to have really good operators in the business, but you can delegate that passion and that quality and know-how down into the organization. That can be delegated, but you really can't delegate that. So here's an example of not thinking like an owner. Schaeffler, biggest, best ball bearing maker in the whole world. But most of their ball bearings go into combustion engines. But what's happening with combustion engines? They haven't gone away. We still use them, but this company, heavily dependent on the automotive industry. Demand for cars, combustion engine cars especially, was declining. And their primary product, they had about 70% of their entire business devoted to making these little ball bearings. But they were the best. They were the highest quality, the best in the world. But they were becoming unnecessary. Now, So in 2019, just as COVID was hitting too, bad timing, sales start to really drop. They had to close factories. There was a big decline in jobs, but also their wealth. Should their board and the owners, it's a small ownership group, have been paying attention and predicted the decline in automotive combustion engines? Should they have been seeing that? I think so. Now, is this malpractice on the part of the board? I don't know. But I know it's a real failure of ownership, that this really should have been seen. Here's a good story, though. Cox Enterprises, fourth generation, US-based company. For 100 years, they were in the print newspaper business. And what's happened with the print newspaper business? Well, it's gone away, pretty much. I mean, you can still buy a newspaper, a print newspaper. But most of these have now had to convert to digital. But over time, they were doing all of this. But at the end of the third generation, they were already seeing the decline in circulation, advertising revenue, other things that were warning signs. And then the fourth generation takes over. And I credit this swift move to sell off and harvest the newspaper business really to the fourth generation, and supported by the third, who could have made life uncomfortable because they lived newspapers. And so they move out of this, they move into, the third generation actually becomes a big cable TV provider, but the fourth generation moves to digital publications. They have grown now to 20 billion. They've more than doubled their revenue because of the swift move and because they paid attention. They loved their high quality newspaper business, but they knew enough to move out of it in time and into new technology and new products. And they were able to do this, and it's really saved them as a family company. Here's another good story. Big Belgian shipping company. And ships all over the world burn dirty carbon-based fuels. They create a lot of pollution. And in the fourth generation again, Alex Savries, I don't have a picture of him, sorry, said to his family several years ago now, he said, it's going to take me 10 years, but I want to see if we can create a hydrogen-powered ship. And they've now got smaller vessels operating on hydrogen, completely clean fuel that they can make out of water. And they're a sailing company, and so they're around water a lot. And their goal was to not be disrupted, but to disrupt. Now, the reason they were able to do that is because the family, and especially the next generation, were thinking like owners. And they appreciated the high quality of their business, and they're a very good company, but that's what it takes. Here's the final example. Adriana Cisneros, one of my favorite leaders, likes taking after her dad, Gustavo, who just passed away last year. And Adriana says, look, we need to keep learning. And we're going to be committed to certain businesses that have a long life. We're going to stay with those businesses until they're no longer good businesses for us. Then we'll sell them or we'll harvest. But I need to be in kind of this middle ground. This is Private equity, this is venture capital, is the middle ground. Direct investing into longer term, not long, but medium term business opportunities. And then I'm going to have some short-term investments that I'm going to watch carefully too. But it's this notion that my job is to be a great owner and to assemble a portfolio of different kinds of investments, learn from them, and know when to place the big capital bets. That's her notion. And that's what her dad did, and that's also, if you look back at their history, which I have, it's what her grandfather did. She's doing it in a much more sophisticated way. But it's the same basic strategy, and that will keep you alive. Now, boards, they need to get better too, because we really need the advice, and they need to be really pointed out there. And boards and owners, we always think of boards giving advice down to management. Then they do. And they hold management accountable. That's their job. But they also need to give advice up to the owners about what's coming at us, et cetera, and what should we be thinking about, and how do we stay competitive, and what do we need from the owners. And one way that we're now thinking about this, I'm going to get it. Okay. Whoops, sorry. I did it too much. Is to create boards. Boards tend to get very routine oriented. And most boards aren't very good at looking out and thinking about the future, mostly because of how we use them. So one of the things we're experimenting with right now is to create, this probably belongs on the board, a future readiness committee that can, it's composed of board members, has to have some owners on it, a couple of managers, a couple of outside advisors, to really think about what's coming at us. Which of those many trends ought we be trying to figure out, and to analyze the potential impacts by doing good scenario planning, and then to think about how we're going to respond, and to make sure that the owners, the board, and the management team are all aware of what we're seeing. And I'll just give you this to think about. We've been thinking about this in a very concrete way, but we're finding that I've only sold this concept now to a couple of companies, but I'm on it, and really think that this is something that can help a lot of companies, but it'll take an investment of time, not so much money, but an investment of time for sure. So, finally, resilience. You're going to need a lot of it. Unity, talent, financial, and friends in the future. So, we live in a turbulent time. Leaders, including owners, need to really think like owners and think up here about what's coming at them. So owners, which has usually been thought of as a pretty passive role, need to step up. And that's where I'll stop. So, thank you. Do we have time for a question or two?
Yes, I think we could do.
Yes, please. Right behind you. Great.
Mike? Let's see, there's one here.
Thank you, Professor Davis, for a really enlightened talk. I, really learned so much here. This is a new area of research to me, so thank you for bringing me up to speed. Just to play the role of the devil's advocate a little bit.
Please, I knew that was coming after that nice introduction.
So One of the things that your colleague at MIT, Steven Pinker, talks about in his book Enlightenment Now is the idea that we are living through some of the most peaceful times in history, right? You look at the data on health, poverty, many of those metrics.
Yeah.
You're presenting a view that I personally feel is true, but how would you respond to Pinker's arguments? And it reminds me of a quote from Kipling, if you can meet triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same, and some of what you're doing is really to kind of build that sort of presence. And when you talk of ownership mindset, it seems to be about really kind of meeting the triumph and disaster with a sense of presence, right? That's what you're advocating.
Yep.
So I'm just wondering, how would you place your view of the world with Pinker's view of the world?
Well, the world has accomplished a lot of good things. And as I said a bit earlier, if you've got the talent and the capital and the insights, there are some real opportunities that you can grow your business with and make a lot of money and do a lot of good. He's not wrong about that. The world is a much better place today in a lot of ways than it was a century ago. And, no argument. But the world is also a far riskier place today, and which he has not really addressed that. And yeah, so there's a lot more good, there's a lot better health. The world we have cleaner water today than we did in 1920, for sure, right? But we also are facing a really risky situation in terms of the environment, and technology. I think everyone is saying, thank God it's getting better, it's more it can help us a ton, but not unless environmental technology is not going to help us unless the governments really insist on it, right? So there are a lot of risks. And what I want, and part of this is, here's the thing about management and leadership. What do you pay attention to? And if you're looking down your entire leadership career into the organization and fixing these problems, that could work really well, unless something happens out there that you're not paying attention to. So I'm trying to get people to pay attention out here. Get people to be operationally excellent. But leaders, owners, you're accountable for the success of this organization. It's your job. If you don't pay attention, and if your board doesn't pay attention, management certainly won't. So you've got to do this. So it's really about, what are we supposed to pay attention to, and who can do that, right? So ownership is not a passive job. You need people that take that job seriously. All right? So, great, thank you. Thank you. I don't want to chew up much more of your time, Ravi. What do you
Time
think?
for maybe one more question?
I asked Mr. Forbes this morning the same question, asking again that I see a lot of friends and extended family, and the next generation is choosing to rather go in a family office setup and focus on real estate investments and other investments,
Right.
and not focus on their core business. So, do you think this would affect the core business, and what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think, except for calling the non-family executives professionals and family members, except for that, you need highly professional. Most businesses that grow to any scale need really good management today. Management's gotten harder, more demanding, and you better step up. Your management team has got to increase in skill and experience, et cetera. Do you need to have family in the old core business of the family in order for it to be run well? No, I don't think so. As long as the people in that business carry your values, okay, and your standards, and understand, and you pay them well, but they understand that you're watching, okay? You cannot afford to not watch. What we tell families today, what I've said for a long time, is look, every generation, you've got to have your hands on the steering wheel. You can't go like this. And how you keep your hands on the steering wheel can change generation to generation. Does it help to understand the operations of a business if you're an owner of it? Yes, it does. It helps to understand how things work and how managers need to behave to make it work well, right? As owners, that's part of what you need to learn. But if you don't want to work there, you've got to find another way to learn about that business. And then you can be on the board, you can be a good owner, you know, and having some distance, with that understanding, having some distance up here as an owner can help you make some better decisions. Okay? Is that okay?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Okay.
John.
Thank you. Thank you all. Farhad.
Follow up on that because he asked me that question in the morning, and I said he should ask you the question because I remember some years ago in Suzhou, you made a presentation to our family business at the summit, and you mentioned something about return on the family's return in terms of growth
Yep.
for families which had sold their business
Yes.
and then just managed the money,
Yeah.
and families which stayed as owners of their business
Right.
and need not be operators, but they were still involved with a operating business.
That's right. Yeah.
Could you just comment on that? Because I think you did some research to show
Yeah.
what the benefit was of one over the other.
Yeah. Thank you, Parad. You know, well-run operating companies outperform most every other kind of investment that you can make long term. You can invest in some things that go like this for a while, right? But long-term returns to families tend to, families that stay in their operating companies, they can have other investments too, and they should. I mean, I think some diversification is really useful. But those that stay in operating companies tend to outperform families that choose a financial portfolio or divide it up and let people do what they choose. So that's what the data says. Now, are there challenges staying together as a family? Does it cost you something? Emotionally, socially, whatever? Yeah, it does. But the financial returns of good management, good ownership are, you know, thank you for that question. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, John. Let's give John a big
Thank
round
you.
of applause.
Thank you.